Thank you, Martin, and thank you so much for inviting me. I really like to extend my gratitude to the organizing committee. Leipzig is such a pretty town, and it hasn't rained. I'm from Ireland, and I'm carrying my umbrella around, and I hasn't once had to use it, so brilliant. Thank you so much. So just to explain why I've been researching translation, I belong to this large group of translation studies scholars, and particularly in my university we're focused on technology. So I'm specialized in translation and technology. So in fact you might have noticed this translating button. This is not Google Translate. Actually that translation, as you know, is not Google Translate. It's human translation. Just as bad. Coming back to Dublin City University, so we do a lot of research, and my particular passion has been game localization, because that is a great depiction of technology and translation. And we've been hearing last few days all about 8-bit, and I really get so thrilled hearing about 8-bit, so really otaku, you know. So anyway, Dublin's got lots of rain, but keeps place very green. And when it rains, we can have Guinness and read James Joyce, Ulysses, for example. By the way, it took 10 years for Japanese translator to translate Ulysses. So it's a very weird and fantastic story. So coming back to conference theme, replaying Japan, I really love this combination of Japanese studies and game studies. It's a really wonderful hybrid interdisciplinary research area, which I really like to join in you, promoting this combination. So looking at the conference theme, I was really excited because these are the things I'm really interested in: global culture, local, global, and gaming culture, because culture is very, very important for translation. So olden days, translation was about equivalence. We are only looking at linguistic elements. But a long time we ditched that concept. Of course, linguistics come into it, but it's really all about culture, just translating culture. And I'm arguing this is translating gameplay experience. So it's a very interesting new field. So today I'm pitching the role of localization and especially talk about culture. So this is where my title comes, Martin. That's why exactly has to be that, right? So this is a Sega's Zero Wing game, 1991, and of course Japanese original was in Japanese, and read something like "Cats is alien," and it said something like all your base stations, we seized all your base station, and it came out like this. So now this is used as a quality of localization in those days. And the interesting thing is, though, gamers are not necessarily complaining about this. In fact, some of them are loving it. So this made me think, well, for other types of translation, we consider this very, very poor translation because grammatically it's even doesn't make sense. But game, context, it's ludic environment, and this has become part of sort of playful element of games. So this made me think about, recheck about our translation scholars' understanding of translation quality was extremely challenged. So this is a kind of like an undertone of my talk. So today I'm going to divide my talk into two parts. First part, I'm going very descriptive and basically just going a little bit back on the history, because this conference is very retro, and because historic trajectory is so important to understand today. So I go back a little bit about localization history before going into my research areas. So that's my plan. So when we look at the evolution of games, initially games such as Pong, there really wasn't much text to be translated. Even Pac-Man had a relatively small amount of text. But Pac-Man had very important things we needed to translate. Names. And names are often very, very tricky to translate because it has to be punchy and, sort of pithy. That shouldn't be very long and hard to remember. They have to be memorable. So this is where really translators' creativity goes into, and we call it transcreation. Sometimes people have to almost start from scratch. And in fact, by the way, did anyone notice when yesterday Iwatani-san put up his very valuable spec sheet, Pac-Man's spelling was different. Did anybody notice it? Yeah? P-U-C-K, man. And American office said, this is asking for it, right? So they changed PSC. So that kind of role the localization has, very important role. So it was simple, and this kind of very simple localization, not much text within the game, but maybe wording on the package and just a few lines of instructions. They used to be called docs and, what was it? Gosh, I just suddenly remembered. Docs and packs. It will come back to me later. So very little text to translate initially. And then when you look at, Final Fantasy games, for example, JRPG has got so much text. It's very typical these days to have more than 1 million English words to translate. That means it's extremely expensive and time-consuming. And that's one of the reasons why some games are never localized or delay. They can't do simship. And also today's games, typical AAA games have movies within that, cutscenes, and they need to be subtitled or dubbed. So it's again, add to cost and time. And speaking of Square Enix Final Fantasy games, because in this conference, a number of people are talking about Final Fantasy games, including Opera, we just heard this morning. Now, next one, of course, coming out in September, Final Fantasy 15. Now, this one is going to be voiced in German and French. And also they're specifically catering for Latin America, because Latin America is now becoming a huge market. So they, at least text, they translate for Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and Mexican Spanish, etc. So really localization sphere is expanding all the time. So classic scenario for Japanese games are so-called FIGs, French, German, Italian, Spanish. But the market has been really exploding. So it's typical to localize into, say, 10 languages. And of course, this year, the game award was taken by, what game is that? Pokemon Go, of course. And even in Ireland, there are some rare Pokemon found. And so it's, this kind of constant development of technology, and localization has to move with it. So it's very much the combination between translation and technology. And that's what I find really, really interesting. So talking a little bit about history of localization, game localization. Interestingly, there are many books, a lot of literature available on game history. But when Carmen Mangiron and I were writing our book, Game Localization, we found it actually very little coherent literature available on the history of game localization. So we actually had to piece together text from different sources. But one of the really good ones we found is by Hasegawa. And I think he's actually CEO of Square Enix. So he knows the context very well. And he divided this kind of evolution into different phases. So it starts from early phase up to, say, mid-80s. So this is when really localization was invented, really. Especially game localization was invented by the industry because they really needed it to be able to, particularly for Japanese games, to be sold all over the world. Especially North America is such a big market. And then this followed between 90s, basically during 90s. This is considered to be trial and error growth phase. This is when copious amount of poor quality localization was produced. But games sold really well. For example, Final Fantasy VII was considered to be very poor localization, but it sold more in America and all over the world. It sold extremely well. So in a way, really poor translation / localization did not affect. Well, we can never tell because we already had it. But as I said at the beginning, somehow gamers' notion of quality is different from what translation scholars consider good and bad, good and poor translation. So today now, into 2000s and 2005, and as I mentioned, technology is really affecting this gaming field. And one of my research interests at the moment is, I was talking to James Newman there, that fan activities, fans actually translate and fans actually localize. They actually reverse engineer this complex localization process without any manuals. And they are very techy, highly technical experts. And they usually work with translators, people who know language, and then they produce localized version the way they like it. So it's a really interesting field. So what is game localization? Well, depending on who you ask, you get slightly different answers, because there's no definitive description of game localization today. So referring to my own book with Kalman, we described as transforming a game developed in one country into a form suitable for sale in target territories according to a new set of user environments with linguistic, cultural, and technical implications. So it's a very complex process, and also legal issues as well. So today I'm going to particularly focus on cultural issues. So if we zoom in more, this is the way I usually explain to my postgrad students what game localization is. So if you can think of jigsaw puzzle, each piece you can think of an element, translatable element. It's called asset. And these days, games are very complex, so there are many different types of assets. And of course, depending on games, there are many different assets. So for example, in-game text assets like warning messages, user interface. And these are typically sometimes one word to translate. And then art assets means that maybe some text within a poster and a background, and that gives an important clue, then that has to be translated as well. And then cinematics. And I didn't actually mention it here, but songs are also a very, very important element for localization and translation. And quite often, Final Fantasy series, they don't even translate. They have new songs made in the target market, especially North American market. So they really put a lot of resources, into this localization. And of course, printed materials, advertising materials, and websites need to be translated. So translators get any part of these pieces, and told, translate this. So you can already see the challenge. So this, I don't know if you can see it, but at least you can see color-coded boxes. This means so many different people are involved, different parties are involved. Of course, this differs from game to game. AAA games are very different from, say, social games, indie games. But this is one typical example of, say, console games, how they are localized. So it's a very complex project management required, and increasingly it's technologized. Well, interestingly, this is an oxymoron. So, you would think game localization must be very technologized field within translation. Well, actually, not really. By comparison, other technical translation fields are much more technologized. So, for example, we often now use technology called translation memory. Has any of you heard of translation memory? This is basically an idea of translation recycling. This is a database to store all the past translation done with source text and target text linked together. And the idea is the computer automatically detects with your new text for any similarities to the previously translated text, and then bring up previous translation. So the idea is that translators do not need to start from scratch, but edit the existing translation. That's the idea. However, in game localization, this is relatively new. And I was wondering why this is the case, and talked to a number of industry people, and they almost all confirmed that because each game is so different, it's very difficult to standardize. And also, as I explained, that assets, different types of assets are involved. So it's been resisting this kind of use of technology. But however, having said that, now, consistency of use of terminology through game series is very, very important. And translation memory and with terminology management components are very, very useful for that purpose. So many companies are developing their own translation memory type of technology. And it's really funny that Square Enix one is called MUMO, and that comes from mo muri, because they couldn't cope anymore with some kind of technological assistance, because game is getting just so complex. So ad hoc approach doesn't work anymore. So in this diagram, I just wanted to point out just one purple thing here, voiceover. So as you can imagine, by the way, the terminology voiceover is used in game localization to mean dubbing. So voiceover is very, very expensive, and sometimes they use celebrity voiceover, then price absolutely goes up. So you can't afford to redo with Bruce Willis or whoever. So it comes after all the checks been done. And then, but still sometimes there are some errors. So, but it's very, very expensive. So therefore, only very important markets get this voiceover for the movies. But more and more, in order to increase the user engagement, this voiceover is used. So they argue, the publishers now consider voiceover really helps to engage gamers more. So that's the argument. And so once translations are done, bits and pieces are done, they are compiled back together into software. So because translators did translation without context, they always do testing. So they do two types of testing. Functional testing to see if games work, if translators hasn't wrecked anything, any code. And also they do specific linguistic testing. That is to really check if translation fits in the context. So it's a very different type of translation from other more conventional translations. So these are some of the challenges that game localizers face. So as I already mentioned, games are becoming more and more complex. And if particularly translators are not gamers themselves, they can't make an educated guess where this asset might have come from. So the error of merging goes right up. So we talk about risk management and translation risk management. So sometimes, say, translators are given just one word to translate. So for example, suit. And there are many different translations depending on context, but contexts are not available. Then they are told to come up with most neutral translation, if it's possible, which could fit in many contexts. This is not always possible, but they are told that other times. So decontextualization is really one of the biggest challenges in this field. And as I mentioned before, Japanese publishers, they are now really trying to shrink the time gap between the original games that are published in Japan and localized versions come up, especially, say, Nintendo is trying to really shrink the time frame. But they are often not simship. Simship means simultaneous shipment, meaning that localized versions are published together with the original. So this means translators have to start working before the game is finished. So they have never time to understand the game world fully. So it's, again, extra challenging context. So, for example, Final Fantasy series, they've been always post-gold, meaning that games are first published in Japan, and then sometime later, the localized versions are published. So they are, in some cases, able to make improvements in localized versions. But even then, the time gap, as you probably noticed, is shrinking and shrinking. So that means translators have less time to translate. And also when we translate games, especially user interface, there's a limited space available for translation. And the German is such a challenge always expands. And especially, Asian languages, we have such an economical writing system using ideographs. We can use one character to mean a lot of things. But then in German, you have to say it in such a long words. So So this is a really good, big challenge. And yet, translators are not really encouraged to use abbreviation because it's very confusing. So you have to remember that people who play game are reading these texts while they're playing a game. So they don't have time to pause and read and next. Can't do that. So translation has to be short, succinct, and clear in meaning. And when translators translate specialized games such as flight simulator games, there's a lot of technical terminology, and they have to be get right because often these games might be used by professionals, pilot training, for example. So getting terminology right is utmost importance. And this is very similar to technical translation, and also particularly, military games, a lot of jargon. And these are really killer because if translators are not familiar, they could make horrendous mistake and doesn't make sense to the gamer. So these are some of the trappings. And then age ratings and censorships. So these are each and every single game has to be age rated. This is not legally bound, but no stores will stock the game which is not age rated. And this is country specific. So what's considered to be, say, age 3 in Japan can go up in other countries, and it has happened a lot of times. For example, public bathing scene. It's nothing in Japan, but nudity in foreign countries, and so age, rating might be go up. So this is meant to be really kids' game is only allowable to be played by adults in other markets. This mismatch could take place. And intertextuality, especially with Japanese games, with manga and anime. So translators have to be very, very aware what's current in manga, what's current in other popular culture. So there are just so many challenges involved in this area. I'm sure some of you must have seen this panel. This is really used quite a lot. And it's oversimplification, but it's an excellent illustration to show what culturalization means. The same game can be changed like this, depending on the target market. So the first panel here, you can already tell, skinhead running around with gun, a lot of blood. Look at the German version, very clean, the skinhead is covered up with a pistol. And Korean version, game character design completely changes, and similar to Japan, more anime-inspired design. So this is a kind of extreme examples. But some games, some of the changes made are like this. So I need to here just take time to talk about a German system a bit because we're in Germany. So as some of you know, USK is the government organization to rate, this age rate for each and every single game. And they have very, very strict rules. For example, no blood allowed. But the blood is green, that's fine. But you need to know that. So the developers need to know right at the start that these implications will be coming on for localization. So now very savvy game developers are using so-called internationalization. So that means when they develop the game, they already think about implications for localization and translation. So they are already able to cater for German markets, for example. So these are very different thinking to treating translation as an afterthought. But I have to say, not everyone is doing it, only very savvy ones. So to give you some examples of culturalization, now of course, Crash Bandicoot is such a successful American game, and it's one of the very few non-Japanese games which succeeded in Japanese market, thanks to, some will argue, localization. So Sony Computer Entertainment undertook the localization process, and they changed a lot of things. For example, character design. This Crash image here, very kind of bushy eyebrows. And Japanese kids didn't like this. And the whole design was turned into more kind of anime style. And another interesting change they made, a bit subtle, is that the original had 4 claws, but for Japanese version had to be 5 claws, because 4 is a very bad number. And also they considered this kind of game would appeal to young children. So they wanted young kids to be able to play Crash Bandicoot. So they felt the original English version made for American market was a little bit too difficult. So they added a lot of hints for kids to be able to play. And vice versa happens. Many Japanese games developed in Japan, when they are localized for US market and elsewhere, might be made easy. So I think that it's just a matter of what one is used to in one's own market. And another thing they changed is background music. We've been hearing a lot about music, and I very much enjoyed Junko-san's presentation. It was very interesting. For example, this game, Japanese testers felt the original music used for battle scene is too nostalgic. Don't encourage, spur you to fight on. So they changed to more kind of fighting kind of, to Japanese ears at least, music. And also so this game was voice-overed in Japanese, and they carefully chose particular voice actor to really bring up this character of Crash. And also they even changed the quality of paper for manuals. So the original version was, just rubbishy, normal paper, and the Japanese manual is like a collector's item, beautifully presented with high quality paper. So they really took care of every single step, and the result was a huge, resounding success. So it really well paid off. Another example, Final Fantasy X. So this is part of my title of this presentation. Does anyone know what Kacho Fugetsu was? It's the name of the weapon. Very powerful weapon in Japanese original. And it literally means flowers, birds, winds, and moon. So beauty of nature. This had to be translated into English, taking less than 18 characters. So the American translators, the Square Enix always arrange for at least big games, 2 translators per language. This is the ideal way to work. So they can bounce ideas to each other. So we interviewed one of them, Alex O. Smith. He's a very well-known American translator of Japanese games. He's actually literary translator as well, won many prizes, excellent translator. So he and his translation partner decided to translate Kacho Fugetsu into painkiller. Painkiller. Why? Transcreation? Why? So we asked Alex. And Alex said, right, this weapon, Final Fantasy games are long-running series of games. And some weapons are part of the game lore, so you can't change the name if already translation exists before. But this one was the first one appeared in Final Fantasy X. So they could do anything they like. So they said, okay, let's just get creative. Because they only have 16, characters. They thought, right, so this weapon is 3 times as powerful as other weapons. So from the user's point of view, just use once, and then you don't need to do grind 3 times. Therefore, it kills your pain. Therefore, painkiller. It's a little bit convoluted, but then, but that was the reasoning Alex gave. And this is a great example for translators just not doing ad hoc job. Each and single item, Alex and his translator partner had reason why they translated that way. And the next example is also another such example. So very end scene, cut scene of this game, this love interest, Yuna and Tidus, you're saying here, Yuna is saying goodbye to Tidus. They don't know when or if they meet again. All she says in Japanese is, with feelings, arigato, like this. And Alex translated it as, I love you, for North American version. This fans' reaction to this was rather interesting. Some approved, yes, great, she finally said it. And others said, no, she'll never say that. No, this is too American. And so that was kind of fans' opinions are divided. But Alex explained to us, in American cultural context, nobody would ever say thank you in this scene. It becomes a joke. It only can be said, I love you. Because I love you doesn't mean romantic love. I love you can mean different things as well. But Alex had another reason. So this was not only subtitled, but voiced over as well. So they had to think about lip sync. So now you say to yourselves, arigato, I love you, matches so perfectly, nearly. So that was another reason. So some translators, give such care for translation. But I have to say, this is not typical situation, because after all, Final Fantasy is such a big, mega hit game, so they can afford to put a lot of resources and pick the best translators. But not all games can afford to do that. And another example I want to give to demonstrate the difference between other types of translation and translating games. So this is translating a voice, a script from Japanese Ni no Kuni. Has anyone played Ni no Kuni? Beautifully presented here, a game with Level 5 and Ghibli Studio. And Oliver and male fairy, Shizuku, Drippy. Now, Drippy in Japanese speaks Osaka dialect. I can't really do Osaka dialect very well, but something like, honma ya, ningen ga oru wa, or something like this. And it directly translates as, oh, it's true, humans. There are humans here. But they translated this. What's this? What dialect do you think it might be? Okay, just hold your opinion. I'll show you another panel here. So these are the screenshots that actually Level 5 released before the game was actually released to the market. And a lot of people are saying there are spelling errors in here. Your is not spelled correctly, and yourself is not spelled correctly. But actually, this was intended to get across this particular dialect, which I will let you listen to.
What just happened?
You just witnessed the rebirth of Drippy, Lord of the Fairies.
Who?
What, are you deaf or something? Drippy, Lord of the Fairies, I said that. That's right, and I'm sick of the teeth of you are snivelling and moaning. A proper crybaby bunting you are. 3 days, man. I've been sad before, but crying for 3 whole days. I'm surprised there's a drop of water left in you. You're a big boy, man. 3 days is, well, it's a new one.
What?
Okay, so which dialect is this? Anyone? Welsh. It's interesting. So, this character, Drippy, is very blunt, but very kind, So they really wanted to bring out this characteristic. And they thought about Australian accent, Irish accent, then they decided Welsh, because not many game characters speak with Welsh accent. So that's the reason they used. Sorry, I'm running out of time, probably. Yeah?
Yeah, just go on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to share this story. I'm sure some of you are already playing Fire Emblem Fates. Any of you? Okay, yes, some yes, yeah. Well, so if you read this headline, it's horrendous, isn't it? So this is Japanese game, very popular Nintendo DS game with a lot of following. And the Japanese latest version came out last summer in Japan. And this was shortly after that release that this headline appeared. Bisexual character drugging to believe men are women and women are men. This sounds horrendous. What was this about? Right, so basically in this game, they have to pair up to basically create babies so that they can continue on with battling. And this one female character, she's a soldier, and she has a certain weakness to attractive-looking female. And she's talking to male fellow soldier, saying that I want to really get rid of this tendency to feel weak in front of attractive female. So this male soldier is trying to help her, to train her not to feel too nervous in front of attractive female. Then he puts Maho no Kona, is magic powder. So this is all interpreted as drugging and gay conversion, etc. But it wasn't really the intention of the original. And there was a whole lot of discussion erupted in social media. And this was erupted even before the localized version was available. But someone who can understand Japanese outside Japan played the Japanese version and reported that and shared their own translation. So all this discussion erupted before anywhere near formal, actual official localized version came out. And this really demonstrated this power of social media and the power of fans. And the game had some really very Japanese-specific elements, such as skinship. This is Japanese English. Skinship typically is used, say, bonding between mothers and babies, by breastfeeding, touching. And the game has an element of this. And then again, this is kind of accused of very sexualization of underage girl, blah, blah. So basically, Nintendo said they had to make a formal announcement saying that they're going to eliminate all of these from the localized versions. But the interesting thing is, this is Google Trend Map. This discussion is all happening in USA, Canada, Singapore, Philippines, Australia, Mexico, France, but not in Japan. Because really, initially at least, these elements weren't really felt as anything problematic. But because of cultural differences, these came across in the wrong way, to some fans anyway. So to cut the long story short, I just really wanted to say this power of social media, and game publishers really cannot ignore fans' voices. So this is just today's nature, and I haven't even talked about my research. What should I do? Do I have 2 minutes? Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to share. So with all this, studying about games, I realized it's extremely important to talk to users of localized games. So, number of speakers now mentioned the importance of talking to gamers. Developers really want to understand what users want. So I decided, okay, translators need to talk to users of localized games. So I started to use different techniques, including eye tracking and measuring heart rates. And galvanic skin response is a bit like a lie detector. It measures arousal, how they are aroused, etc., and facial expressions, etc. And I used this Plants vs. Zombies game, very humorous game, used Japanese localized version and German version to compare. And just to show you what eye tracking technology can do, this screenshot actually from yet different research I'm doing with Japanese telop. But as you can see, this green fields on the top two screens, these are the kind of like a cluster of where eyes went. And the bottom screen here are heat map of fixations, where their eyes fixated. So you can understand, the cognitive load, or where they really focused on the screen, so visual attention. This kind of technology is very useful for understanding, bodily reaction by gamers. And then we interviewed as well. And so this game had pea shooter. Did anybody play? Yeah, it's a very fun game, isn't it? Very humorous. So this pea shooter character, some Japanese subjects, we had 10 Japanese subjects. They said they made them think of bell sprouts from Pokemon. So they had a very positive kind of user experience by having these kind of associations. So when Mr. Iwatani mentioned about this inner game, I very much thought about this kind of inner thoughts this game is evoking. It's a very fascinating thing to know. Of course, we can't know. We don't have X-ray or anything. But researchers are now using fMRI to understand, brain activities. And so more and more game metrics are becoming available, game statistics. And this kind of, eye tracking technology is allowing us to get access to inside of the brains of the gamers. Is really wonderful. By the way, German subjects who played the German version said specifically, so this character, Crazy Dave, is there to make people laugh. They specifically disliked this character. They didn't laugh, and they quickly passed. And when we looked at their eye tracking data, eyes really never went there. So this was opposite to eye candy. So this was really kind of off-putting factor to German players in particular. Sorry, I'm just skipping the whole thing to go to the final seeing. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm really fascinated about this area of research because it combines technology and translation, and the game field is just constantly, innovating itself. By the way, does anyone know what this might be? These look like smart glasses type of idea. This is now used for projecting subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing people. So the same language subtitles can be projected for those viewers who are hard of hearing, and it links with a mobile app. And so this kind of accessibility issue is becoming a big issue, because when we talk about users, they are not homogeneous. Some users cannot even see, cannot hear, or cannot use hands. So technology is helping to make games accessible. In this case, this is a screen accessible to certain users. And do you know Yoshimoto Entertainment Enterprise is a big conglomerate who a lot of entertainers belong to them. Have you heard of this? That people who came from Japan, Yoshimoto's been doing a lot of experiments with subtitling of rakugo and manzai, and putting pre-prepared subtitles in Japanese and English. And in this case, Sanshi was giving this rakugo in Tokyo, and he said he actually didn't like this because he was constrained to the pre-decided script, because usually the professional rakugo people ad-lib, interacting with the audience, what audience reactions are, but he was constrained because of the subtitles pre-prepared, because it's not done in real time. So I just wanted to show this as an example of technology progressing. And so we're using biometrics, big data analytics, and of course Pokemon Go is augmented reality. So I'm sorry to take up so much time. Thank you.